Hey everybody, I'm Joe Mayers, and this is Think Forever Behind the Scenes. We spent the last 2 weeks in the surprisingly suspenseful story Lost, all about Amin and his first encounter with the scriptures. Well, fair warning, if you haven't caught up on those episodes yet, there will be some spoilers ahead because today I'm interviewing the author of that story, Nick Steward. We talk about everything from onions and energy drinks to creative process and parenthood and legacy. He's such a creative writer and an absolute joy to work with. So please enjoy this interview with author Nick Steward. You don't have to have any.
I am going to abstain.
I'm going to go ahead and have my little Zoa. I'm drinking this like I'm sponsored by them. I'm not sponsored.
Do you enjoy it though?
I do. I really do enjoy it. You ever watch Parks and Rec?
Yeah.
You know how Ron Swanson is like,
He doesn't endorse products. He doesn't truly.
He's like, there's a particular brand of saw blade and Morton salt.
Yeah, Morton salt.
And snake juice.
Yeah.
That's like me with Zoa. So
let's get crazy.
Anyway, yeah, no sponsors. But if you want to sponsor, if Zoa wants to sponsor this show, they can.
Absolutely. So I'm always very vocal about the things I like, just in the hopes that they would reach out to me.
Somebody would be like, "Hey, Nick Steward."
Yeah. Someone over at Leuchtturm 1917 ought to see what I've put out for them.
Heard you like Hanes t-shirts.
Yeah.
So, welcome back to California, dude. I know
Thank
it's just
you.
for like a week, but
Yeah.
I'm glad you're back. For those who didn't watch Nick on last season, we had to do this virtually because he lives in Oklahoma.
Yep.
But yeah, dude, I'm just super pumped to have you back here.
Yeah, it's been great to be back. I lived here for 26 years, so as soon as I landed, it pretty much felt like I'd never left. And
you smell that air in the Orange County airport and go,
there was something sweet about it.
Yeah.
You see a mountain, you see a palm tree, and you just breathe in this air that you know could never form into a tornado and kill you. It's like the atmosphere has laid down its weapons in this demilitarized zone of Orange County.
It's good air. It's got a little bit of ocean mixed in it. So I'm glad you're back.
Me too.
I do want to talk about as much as I like just hanging out with you, like you literally got here 10 minutes ago. So we haven't caught up in years.
Nope.
So that's kind of what this is. But as much as I want to do that, I want to talk about your story. And the story to me was super unique because the theme with the Think Forever podcast is just lesser known characters from the Bible and church history. And so most of the time it's characters that we know about. Like your story last season was super unique as well, but it was a character that we knew about, and it was just a sort of a interesting telling of that story. But the character that you chose for this one, at least in our initial conversation, was what if I made the character a piece of scripture that was traveling from one place to another and just build a story around this? And I thought that was a really unique idea. So what drew you to this subject matter? Because you chose a place and a time and all of that. And I have no idea how you arrived there.
Well, initially I was just brainstorming about like what kind of story I could tell kind of within the parameters of the theme of the podcast, and the preservation and copying of scripture manuscripts is something that interests me. There was a story that came out maybe 10 years ago where they found part of the Gospel of Mark in a paper mache mask and they dated the mask to like 55 AD. So like the Gospel of Mark was around at that point.
Oh my gosh.
Long enough for someone to discard it and create paper mache.
To be like, oh, this one's a little broken.
Maybe 60. I'm probably making up the date, but it was within a couple decades of Jesus's life.
We're talking first century.
Definitely first century, yeah. If their dating was correct. And that always struck me as like there's such a story there that like either someone hated this thing and made paper mache out of it, or it was just so around that. But like there was a choice made by some character lost to history that caused this piece of scripture to end up where it ended up. And that has always been interesting to me, that like there's so many stories there's like 20,000 manuscripts of the New Testament, and we're not going to know most of the stories of how those came to be where they are or how they were preserved. And so I was interested in telling that kind of story. And it kind of struck me as like a Rogue One kind of story, where like they're just it's all about just getting one piece of information from point A to point B. And then the reason I landed on Egypt was just because the Roman Empire made more sense, but my story last year was in that area, so I just wanted to do something different. And
yeah, well, and that was the thing that got to me, because I realized that as we talk about church history, a lot of what we tend to focus on, especially here in the West, is one particular branch of church history.
Yeah,
we follow it basically from Rome, and we go north. And so we have a lot of stories about the development of the European church, but not as much of the spread into Asia and Africa and what was going on there. But we also know that there was, even in the same century as Jesus was alive, there was a lot of church movement going on in Africa, in Ethiopia. There was, thriving church there as well. And so just to kind of push us down into that region and see a little bit of that scriptures being translated into Arabic and things like that at that time was really interesting to imagine.
Yeah.
So it was really just I did that last time. Let's see where this can take us.
Kind of. And one issue creatively I ran into was that like in this time and place, there weren't really power structures that were like persecuting the Christian church in this way. Like that time and place was mostly Islamic, and they weren't really, they were persecuting Christians maybe, but they didn't care about the Bible being reproduced and sent out there, because they ostensibly accept the Bible for what it is. And so that I had to come up with some other kind of person that would be trying to destroy this stuff or steal it.
Well, it was a super unique story, and I like the themes that you wove in there with, you essentially had a prodigal son archetype mixed in there with it, and just the power of the scriptures themselves. Getting to see the word of God as a tool all on its own, where Amin had experienced the love and compassion from the monks in that first place. And so he was sort of investigating, and then to read Romans in its entirety. There's nothing that lays out the gospel and the plan for redemption.
That's how Augustine was saved.
Like that. Just read it. And
Augustine happened upon the book of Romans, or that's the story.
So you had Augustine as the prodigal son transferring scriptures around Egypt. Yeah, it was a really, really interesting story. I know that we ran into a word count thing where we shoot for certain word counts. And as I was reading it, a lot of times you'll try to edit things and be like, yeah, let's do this. But as you sent over a draft, you're like, yeah, might be too long. And I was like, no, it's not long enough. I need more. I
think it ended up being 2,000 words longer after that point.
Yeah. No, but it was just a really captivating story. And that's one of the things that I like about what we get to do, especially having the blanket of this is historical fiction. We're imagining things that could have happened. Is just investigating those types of stories.
Yeah.
It was just really enjoyable to work with you on this story, and seeing the difference in your drafts. And as we were going through the editing process, it's fascinating to me how you make the jump from one thing to the next, and trying to see how those things fit together in the refinement process. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit of what your process is like and how that's evolving?
Like thematically?
Yeah. I mean, what does it look like for you, like you have your story idea and you put it down, but then between drafts 1 and 2, you do a lot. And it seems like you're pretty methodical about this, but at the same time, it's not like from what I understand, you're more of a situational writer than a plotting.
I try to do both. Stephen King has this whole idea about like stories being artifacts from another world, and you're just kind of like you're digging them out of the earth as a writer, and you might not have the full picture of what you're digging out until it's revealed. I don't really like that so much because you can add so much to a story by having so much planned out and kind of have meaningful connections from point A to point B and C. And John Truby, on the other hand, like doesn't think you should do anything until every single step of the story is planned out and you need a 20-page outline. And so you're never going to be stuck on anything. And that also doesn't work for me because it wastes all the creativity up front before you've actually done anything.
And it doesn't give your characters, it doesn't give you room to get to know somebody.
There is a sense in which they're kind of doing their own thing. And so you need that Stephen King kind of room to let it breathe and become its own thing. And Rick Rubin also has a whole thing about how like a creative project is probably going to decide on its own to go a different there it is. Man, what a book. Right.
You mean this right here?
That right
Dude,
there.
I don't have a whole lot of books on the shelf right here, and this is one of them.
I'm about to do a second read through of this one because it's so great. But one thing he says is that the creative project is probably going to call its own shots at some point, and don't try to step in its way. So it's a balance for me. Like that's maybe not necessarily your question, but I like to plan out specific beats and then just see if we can creatively get from point A to point B along that. Cause like I definitely knew like where the scroll is going to end up at the end of the story, but I may not have always known like what the struggle during the journey was going to be and whether it was only going to be, a character who shows up and pretends to be a friend and betrays Amin, or whether there was going to be, a lion or something. I mean, like I could have chosen anything, bad example, but, so I try to have those, I try to have very, like the Dan Harmon story circle is like a really good place to start. It's 8-step process for kind of creating a character arc in a story. And that's a really good place to start, and then kind of go with the flow in between those beats and things start to kind of fill in. And then like you're really the only creative partner I have in writing. I don't collaborate with anyone outside of these stories that we do for the podcast. So you're the only one I'm getting feedback from. And then when you tell me something like, hey, XYZ doesn't make sense, typically always something would come to mind that would make that make sense. And it's like, oh, well, there we go. We've already got these pieces kind of laying in the story, doing nothing. Let's just sew those together, and now all of a sudden everything starts to take shape.
Yeah, well, I like to see when, because your brain is putting stories together, and sometimes you're not quite sure, am I giving too much? Am I not giving enough? You want to let the reader, or the listener in this case, have a little bit of freedom to imagine. But that's why I had such a good time doing this with you, is because you'd come with things and I'd look at something and be like, what's this guy doing here? And you put him in there for a reason, but maybe it wasn't as well defined or something like that. And so mainly all I was doing with the editing process is asking clarifying questions.
Yeah.
And that's just so much fun. And that's less of an editor and more of just a sounding board. It's more of a writing group, just to test your story out before it runs wild. And it was just a lot of fun. I remembered the soccer, the the Marauder
Hmm.
guy, and when you were trying to find out, like, okay, who is he? What's his role? Like, I know
Yeah.
that I
Very
want,
ill-defined in the first
I want
draft.
him
Yeah.
to do this, but we got to figure out what that is. And by the end, he was such a good villain.
Yeah.
It was a short amount of time, but it was such a well-defined character.
Yeah.
Like, you know who this guy is.
Yeah.
As you read it. So it was just a lot of fun.
Yeah. The best villains don't get enough screen time. I mean, how much is Darth Vader really in Star Wars in the first trilogy? Like, nowhere near enough. Like, you're always excited to see him again,
Yeah.
and he shows up just long enough to, have this kind of poignant statement about how a thief kind of thinks about people and their actions, and, being an opportunist. And that's actually a perfect example of like your feedback creating something cooler out of the pieces that were kind of already there. Because I don't think this is going to ruin the story for anyone, but like in the first draft, Secure wasn't connected to the Marauders who destroyed the monastery, and we didn't really know who destroyed the monastery.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you were like, hey, we need to define like who this guy is and what his motivations are, all of a sudden it's like, well, we've got this piece doing nothing over here.
Yeah.
And this piece that we can't define over here. They're the same group. Like,
Yeah.
there we go. And now there was a compelling, moment in the story when it turns out he followed him from the monastery. It makes way more sense than not knowing that,
Yeah.
So they do kind of take their own shape and take on a life of their own if you give them space.
Yeah. Well, it was cool to see that process.
Yeah.
So I appreciate seeing a little bit under the hood. I think I relate a little bit to having a little from both of those camps, because I mean, Stephen King's on writing, it's almost like a textbook for me. I go back to it every now and then because there's just poignant little things in there where he has a way of saying things sort of like C.S. Lewis does, not thematically, but in a way where he'll say it and you're like, oh yeah, of course, that makes sense.
Mhm.
How had I never thought to say it that way? But his idea of just, you make some characters and give them a situation and then just see what happens. I feel like I like to do that, but give a couple of touchstones along
Yeah.
the way.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I know I want you to get to here, but then, as you get to know your characters, maybe they do something a little bit surprising,
Yeah.
which can be fun.
He's notoriously bad at ending stories, and that might be why.
Yeah.
He's a great writer. I love his books, but
Yeah.
I mean, most people's opinion is that he can't end a story. So I think if you kind of have more meaningful beats along of like an actual arc that these characters are developing on, then the ending kind of makes sense of itself.
Yeah. If you
And,
can
yeah.
have it be
Yeah.
meaningful right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. One of the things that you and I have talked about in the past, not just with this story, but with other ones, is it doesn't have to be a true story in that these events didn't have to have happened in this order. But I want you to tell me the truth. So what in this story, like what truth is there in the story that you told?
Yeah, I think whether it's the scroll finding its way to the monastery where it's going to be better protected, or whether it's Amin kind of ultimately finding his way back to his father and reconciling that relationship. The theme of the story was basically things being lost and God bringing them back to where they were supposed to be. And he is faithful to do that. He is pursuing his people and bringing his people into the family of God and reconciling all things to himself. Whether or not the story like lays that out very specifically or not, that's kind of what's going on in the background of the story. I'd say it's almost like the Book of Esther, where like God is not mentioned, but he's very clearly working the whole story out. Not that God's not mentioned in the story, but yeah, so I'd say that is it. And there's even like little Easter eggs in the rest of the story, like the coins in the beginning and the shepherd at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the other scenes of the same parable as the prodigal of the son. So, you know, this guy can't pay his bar tab. God arranges for someone to come in and get this money to where it belongs. And, you know, Amin is kind of lost on his way to Alexandria. He arranges for a shepherd to show him the way. You know, there's all these things kind of being arranged for the character, even though the character is kind of making his own choices and having his own journey in the kind of hero's journey structure. You know, things are kind of arranging themselves around him, you know.
Well, to me, I saw the prodigal son, and I saw just a visual representation of the word of God is living and active, and how, you know, clinging to that ultimately changed his life.
Yeah.
So just seeing those two things, because I think those are the truths that I was getting from it. To see how the Lord will work through His word and through people, for His will.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, the people definitely, you know, the compassion that the monks showed Amin got him as far as he got, to the point where, you know, he had the face off with Secure at the river. And just when he's about to give up, the scroll kind of presents itself to him, and he just seemingly randomly reads it, wondering whether this scroll is worth all that he's going through for it. And, you know, so it was sort of God's people and his word bringing this guy to where he needed to end up. But at the end of the day, it was the word that changed his nature and his soul.
Well, that was one of those happy accidents that I thought about too, because he could have, you know, if Secure hadn't found him and tried to steal those scrolls, then he probably just would have made his way to Alexandria and dropped him off, and then been like, well, I guess I'll find something to do in Alexandria now. But because he had tried to steal the scrolls, he's thinking, what the heck are in these scrolls?
Yeah.
Then he reads them and it changes his life. And then, you know, all of those things. And that further illustrated that to me. So whether that's a happy accident, or that's, you know, the way that just there's truth in stories.
Yeah.
You know, to me, I really like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it was the story of the prodigal son that the monk shares with him, and kind of shows him that, like, these are not just stories, you know, these are like things that actually apply to your life, and these are truth. And so I think that kind of was in him already. The seeds of that were kind of planted, and then just when doubt reaches its apex for him in his story, you know, where he almost died for this scroll, you know, he has to ask the question of, like, whether this is worth
my life?
Yeah.
And it seems like he comes away with the answer of yes.
At that point, definitely. Yeah.
Dude, okay, you talk about ending stories. It was a perfect place to end the story, because it gives you this little uptake of hope. And it just, you know, but man, I want to know more about him and his dad and where he lives and all that. I'm like, okay, maybe we'll have to do a sequel or something if we can.
Season 4 of Think Forever is just Secure's story.
just an episodic of his story. Okay. All right. Well, look,
I thought about it. I thought, if there's any way I can continue this story, let's do it. And let's just leave it on the cutting room floor if we have to. And there wasn't any satisfying way to kind of get him out of that second monastery and back on the road.
It was perfect. It was a great way to end the story. And I think leaving people wanting more of it is a perfect place to be. And that's, definitely. I mean, that's true to life too. Like, we always want resolution, but we don't always get it right away. We gotta be a little patient.
Yeah. Kind
of like everyone's going to be patient for season 4 of the podcast, so we can figure out what happened to Amin.
Yeah. Plug.
So, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I appreciate you diving into the story with me a little bit, but I want to know, before we wrap up, how has being in a different location, you know, moving from California to Oklahoma, having a different job, becoming a father. Um, how has that all influenced your writing? Whether it's, you know, the process or the themes, the content, things like that.
Yeah, I think those things influence writing in ways that we can't really articulate. Um, there's definitely just a way of writing that I could not do at 25, and I could not do at 20, and so on and so forth. I always tend to write better when I'm traveling, but I've never really figured out why. And I think it's simply just a change of environment, just as good creatively.
Something
Um,
gives you a little spark.
yeah, and it's not something I can articulate, and it's not that like all of my writing now is about fatherhood and about being a dad, but it definitely has changed that, the but if I can give a plug for a book that won't be out for 5 years, the book that I've been working on, I started writing it, like a year and a half before we even found out we were having a baby. And the theme of it is kind of legacy and, leaving people behind after your death and all this
Mhm.
heavy stuff. And like, since I had a daughter, the story hasn't changed all that much. I mean, it's still the same story I was telling, but it certainly means more to me. So it's kind of these ineffable, influences over the craft that,
Well, probably gives you some new verbiage.
definitely, yeah. I mean, it definitely it, the things that I'm doing in the story. It's not like, oh, I know I'm doing that because I'm a dad now or something, but certainly that is happening. Certainly, the more I change, the more my writing changes, and it's all kind of just coming out of this one monolith of Nick Stewart and who he is and the things that have led him to where he is. So,
Do you think about legacy more that now that you have a daughter?
predictably, I'm less concerned with it. I think the preoccupation of all the characters in this book is kind of what they leave behind and what, how are they spoken of after they're gone, and do people remember them and all this kind of stuff. And I was definitely working out my own demons on that one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, now that I have a daughter, much less concerned with like whether people read my books after I'm dead, or I mean, the survival instincts are much more basic now. It's,
Mhm.
get food on the table, get a roof over our heads, and do things for the fun of it. And
Yeah. So you're more concerned with the moment.
yeah, I'd say so. I think there's much more potential to screw up the present with my daughter than there is to, screw up my legacy after I'm dead.
Yeah.
Because that's happening right now. I can affect that right now.
Well, I mean, that is
You
part
know?
of your legacy, though, right?
Yeah.
Is
Oh yeah, great point.
is the
Yeah.
way that
The things you're doing right
the way
now.
that your daughter will talk
Yeah.
about you after you're gone. Like,
Yeah.
what is that person going to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
that.
honestly, she's far more likely to carry on my legacy than any creative project I
Yeah.
do. And that's kind of what you realize when you have kids is,
I find myself coming head to head with this a lot because when you're writing stories, when you're recording things, when you're putting down things that you hope a lot of people are going to read that could
Mhm.
last
Yeah.
for a long time. You know, obviously we're putting out a ton of stuff, and how many people listen and
Mhm.
how many people read, you know, we don't really know. Some artists didn't even find their audience until after they were gone. Um,
Most of them, sadly.
yeah.
So keep that in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wind up coming head to head with that where I'm like, you know, I'm working on a story or something like that. And my son will come through my office door because I have all my recording stuff is in this room, and his bedroom is on the other side of that wall, right behind you.
Mhm.
And he'll come in and be like, "Hey, Dad, want to go for a walk? Hey, Dad, can we wrestle? Hey, and I'm thinking like, I gotta get this thing done, and this is gonna be important or whatever it is. I'm like, dude, I write great at nighttime. I can do
Yeah.
this. I can do
Yeah.
this after he goes to bed, and trying to have that mentality of like, my son's only going to be 5 one time.
Yeah.
Let's wrestle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like, what would it matter if I finished this book that no one's going to read if my daughter hates me?
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's a good point to make, but hopefully people will read your book. I saw that you were having some issues with the publication.
Different book.
Different book?
Yeah.
Okay, so we got 2 books coming out.
Two books coming out. One is done, and it is.
That's the one that was having the manuscript issues, and
it's a short book, mostly illustrated, about how much I hate onions and all the stories that I've had of onions popping up in places they shouldn't be.
Oh my gosh, are you serious? What's it called?
Yeah, it's called I Hate Onions.
Is this a children's book?
No, definitely not. But
okay.
But it is sorry, I just did a lot of cool like graphic design work with the story kind of interweaved. So it's just it's a short, maybe 100 pages.
Man,
little 4x6 book.
I keep finding out new things about you. I saw that you posted a bunch of hand-drawn Christmas cards.
Yeah.
You're just randomly excellent at visual art.
No, that's taken a lot of work.
No, I'm not. Well, I mean, yes,
I'm not good at it.
Worked
I
very
don't think.
hard.
No.
But I looked at those things. I'm like, dude, these are awesome. You're out here writing stories and publishing books and writing for our podcast and illustrating Christmas cards in your own books. And
yeah.
So do we have a release date for I Hate Onions?
Well, it's supposed to be the 13th of December. I chose that date very specifically, and then found out that it had been pushed back to the 19th, and I didn't get any sort of notification or anything. And then they're telling me that the measure, I can go on for hours about how upset I am at Amazon. Basically, I had printed proofs of it and it looked great. And I said, I consent to just putting it out as is. I've got a printed copy. It looks fine. And they said, no, it's not the right measurement. It's not what we do. And I'm like, even if I just tell you that it's fine, you still can't. Yeah. So I've gotten a 4th proof of it. I had it delivered to my parents' house, and I think it looks good. So I'm hoping for January 4th.
Okay.
I can't imagine this thing isn't out by the time you're watching this. So,
I Hate Onions by Nick Steward. Yeah. I'm gonna read it and
available.
Give it either a great or a scathing review. I can't imagine you being mediocre in this thing.
Yeah, I can't imagine getting a 3.
Yeah,
people are either gonna love this.
This is a 1-star or a 5-star situation.
Yeah. I've gotten good feedback from my coworkers. They do find it funny. So that's really all I was trying to do, was just make something funny. So
yeah. Well, after your first book, a little something funny is warranted.
Yeah, what a bummer that was. that book.
Yeah, it was well written. I enjoyed the language, but it was not uplifting.
Yeah, and what I realized watching,
were you working out some stuff in that one too?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think Adam was definitely the character I was working out demons with. But I was watching, I love film noir. I'm not like a real film buff. And I haven't seen some of the greatest movies ever made, but I like film noir specifically. And I was watching a few, and I read a book of essays about kind of the art form. And I started to realize, like, now that I think about it, in 2018, when I first started like putting things together for that story, I was massively obsessed with film noir. And I think that's what I was going for. It was kind of an investigative, like heavily cigarette smoking, kind of fatalist. Like, he makes one decision that kind of leads to the whole thing, and then his fate's kind of sealed before he can even do anything about it, like all this. So I was definitely going for something there that I may not have understood till after the fact, but
Well, it definitely had that film noir vibe.
yeah.
You could almost get the like little bit of like the like wafts of smoke haze through
Yeah.
through every scene. If you
Yeah.
just put that filter on, that perfectly
Yeah.
describes.
Yeah,
the book.
the hopelessly broken investigator is definitely the film noir
Yeah.
trope, you know.
Anyway, looking forward to reading.
Yeah.
I Hate Onions.
Yeah.
Out now, probably.
It must be.
Must be out now.
It must be.
Can I say, okay, sorry, I call this bouncy ball brain because I just started thinking about something we were just talking about a little bit more on legacy is, and this is a little bit of a plug too. I just finished earlier this year, book 2 of the Dragon and the Girl series, by another author who's going to be on
Cool.
this season, Laura Findlay Evans. That's actually there's some maps behind you up there. Those are from that book.
Very cool.
And I got done with it, and you know, it's a big project, and we've been working on this series for a long time. She started writing it a long time ago, and it's been the last couple of years we've done the audiobooks for it. And my son really likes the audiobooks. And they're sort of in his age range. They're a little bit older, but he still likes the stories. And the other day I was putting him to bed, and sometimes he'll listen to an audiobook before bed. Sometimes he'll listen to some music or something like that. I got a little speaker in his room, and he says, "Hey Dad, can you put on The Dragon and the Girl so you can stay in here with me?" And my heart like exploded at that moment. It was just like the cutest thing in the world. But it also made me think about, as I'm working on things and balancing the work and the home and the kids and the job and all that. But it made me think about doing things to leave them behind for my family, that these can be a part of that. And he articulated that to me, that he wanted me to put that on so that he could still feel like I was with him.
Yeah.
And I guess that's part of what I'm hoping in producing these creative projects, is that we can have something to leave behind for our kids when we are gone.
Yeah, and it certainly makes me think twice about the kind of content I create, because everything I do is so negative and depressing. My music is sad, my books are sad, my everything. So I have, since becoming a dad, thought like it would be nice to produce something a little more positive and a little more meaningful to, for a 6-year-old girl to enjoy as well as a 30-year-old man, and so that has kind of changed my creative direction a little bit.
Well, I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
Like back when we first met, and we were just playing music a whole lot, and it was a whole lot of whether it was like the emo genre, it was definitely emo feeling lyrics and things like that. And I put out an EP and would play shows all the time, and it was all just angsty kind of stuff. And since my kids have been born, I have written songs like the Moon Jelly song. It's all about those little moon jellyfish that you can touch outside of the aquarium. We have a toothbrushing song. We have a song called Dadder Day.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a potty talk song where we just we get all of our potty talk out in one song before we leave the house, so that we don't have to do it out there. We're not at the park, and he's
Genius.
Screaming stuff like that. So, I think in practical ways, that can happen. If I Hate Onions isn't a kid's story.
No.
Have you started any? Have you done any projects like that are like?
No.
I guess your daughter's not really old enough to like engage with that stuff yet, so you probably have a little bit of time. But
yeah, I've been working on the 2 novels back to back since 2021. So I jumped literally the day after I finished editing Black Threads and started working on getting it published. I jumped into the rough draft of the one I'm still working on. in late 2022. So I haven't had time for anything besides things like this, where I kind of just purposefully take a break from what I'm doing to work on a different project. And
do you ever find that working on a separate creative project can help you with the first one? Like, even if it's in the same sort of family? Because I find that if I'm stuck, if I'm writing something and I'm like, I'm stuck, I feel like I'm in a slog, got writer's block on this thing. If I jump into another writing project, even though it seems like taking a break from writing through writing wouldn't work, sometimes it's just refreshing.
Yeah.
If it's something completely different, it gets your mind off of it.
Yes.
Does that happen for you, or do you need to do something completely different?
This certainly helped. Finishing up I Hate Onions and getting that all done certainly, like,
you're welcome.
Yes,
Nick Steward.
Yeah, no, it really
Happy
was.
to help.
I've got another idea for a short story that I might jump into before I go back to the novel, just because it's kind of bugging me, and I think I'd like to get it out of my system. And I just, when I kind of took a break from the novel, I was like, man, I've been working on this every single day, and I feel like I'm nowhere with it. And now I kind of feel like, oh, I'm very excited to like get back into that project. And
I did almost the exact same thing. I've been working on another play, to like another one-man show to follow up the Bema, which I go and do live in different places, and had just been stuck on how to wrap it up, because I had finished it and it was way too long. It wasn't going to fit, and there was too much information. And so I took a break and I worked on this nativity story project with another with a church, with a local church. They were doing this drive-through nativity thing. They wanted a story. We connected. I was able to help them out with that. And working hard on another project actually gave me some new ideas and some more motivation to finish up. And it was like coming back to it. All of a sudden it was clear. I'm like, oh, that's how I do it.
Yeah.
And it was super weird, because it's not like I had to go and take a vacation or go to the mountains or anything like that. It was literally just sit in the same spot and do something different.
Yeah. Not only have I had a lot of ideas come to me kind of in the downtime while I'm working on other things, but once those projects are done and off the table and I'm not focusing on them all the time, there is a weight lifted where it's like, oh, I am now free to go back to this thing, and it's enjoyable. And there's all these ideas that have come. I think I've taken 2 months off of the novel at this point. It's been kind of a while. And a lot of things have come to mind that I've jotted down for later. And, there hasn't been that urgency to get back into it. But
does it feel laborious to hop back into a project that you know is going to take a while?
Not this time, just because I'm excited to get it done. But I was getting to the point where I felt like I'm not enjoying this day to day. And there was just, a creative choice I made that I'm kind of married to now that I don't think I can really go back on. And it was becoming a lot of work. It basically became like 4 time jumps, getting them down into 3 for the sake of space. And chronologically just moving everything around in the story was just like getting really hairy for me. But I think I have more clarity after my break away from it to kind of go back in and just do what needs to be done. So
so I don't remember the original person who said this. I've heard Dax Shepard on the Armchair podcast say this a couple of times, that I don't like writing, but I love having written.
Yeah.
Who said that?
I don't know, but I have heard that.
Yeah.
And yes, that is it.
And in the best of times, I love writing. I love sitting down and feeling it just flow. And there will be a moment when you just have an idea and it has to come out, and then you do it. But that's not always the experience.
Most of the time won't be.
Yeah.
You can't chase that, because that is very intermittent and not going to happen. But what you can chase is having finished something.
Well, it gets lonely to me to feel Like you're enclosed, the door is closed, you got, however you want your lights set up and things
Mhm.
like that. And it's just you and your characters and a keyboard. And it gets to the point where you're like,
Yeah.
does any of this make sense?
And no one in my life is a part of this book. No one's read it. No one knows what it's about, really. Haven't gotten very specific with people. You're someone I'd like to give an advanced copy to and get some feedback from.
Yeah.
But like, we're still a year away from that even happening at this point.
I'm excited.
So it does feel like I leave to go to this other world every day and kind of have to just come back to this world with whatever emotional baggage happened there.
It's like you signed a weird NDA with your creative inner mind.
Yeah, literally. I mean, I could talk about it if I wanted to, but who wants to hear it, right?
You want to talk about it?
No.
Okay. You want to talk about it after we turn the cameras off?
Maybe.
Okay. Ooh. I'll come back. I'll dish.
Yeah, I don't care. Say whatever you want.
Oh man. Well, dude, it's been so great having you back.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for the story. It was a
Thank you for asking me to do it.
really great story. And thanks for coming to just chat about it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know we didn't just talk about the story, but better than having Christmas with your family.
Definitely. Yeah,
okay.
For sure.
I'm gonna send this to your mom.
Yeah.
Like,
hey, she'll see it.
Nick said. All right, man. Well, any last thoughts before we go?
No, just thank you for asking me to do it again, and I enjoyed it and loved talking about it.
Yeah, man. Always a pleasure. Looking forward to the next ones we get to do together.
Thanks, man.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for watching. For our audio listeners, this is available on video on YouTube and Spotify if you'd prefer, or you can just keep on listening right where you're at. For more information about Think Forever and Nick Steward, you can check out the show notes. If you are enjoying the show, we'd love it if you would leave us a comment down below and just let us know what you think. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you again next week with a brand new story from Think Forever.